So I think we're about ready to start. There's our great panel. So welcome everyone, good afternoon, and welcome to our Data Science for the Public Good Distinguished Speaker Series. This is part of our Data Science for the Public Good Forum, which is a partnership between University of Virginia's Biocomplexity Institute, our Darden School of Business, our new School of Data Science, and the Democracy Initiatives Equity Center. I want to welcome everybody back to Zoom since our last two events. And although it is really pleasant and enjoyable to see everybody in person, I do have to say that this modality allows us to reach people across the globe and bring this wonderful forum to them. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sally Keller. I'm a distinguished professor in our Biocomplexity Institute at University of Virginia, and I also lead our Social and Decision Analytics Division. I want to thank our generous sponsors whose support for the forum makes it possible. That includes Avison Young, the Washington Statistical Society, NORC at the University of Chicago, the American Statistical Association, our studio, Sage Publishing, and Westat. We really appreciate the support that you all bring us, and we also appreciate the support from all of you attending here today, which allows us to bring together public and private stakeholders to discuss how doing data science can support evidence-based policymaking and innovation, and all of that helps enhance the quality of life where we all live, learn, work, and play. For a little bit of housekeeping before we start, with this virtual forum, if you have questions, and we will have time for questions at the end of the session, you should use your Q&A button. Can you all hear me? I'm getting a chat saying they can't hear me. We can hear Sally and only see Sally. We hear you. Okay, I guess we're good, so we'll continue. So if you have questions, put it in the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. And at the end of the session, we will go through as many questions as we have time. We'll have to close our session at 5 p.m., so we will apologize if we can't get to your question. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers. Our speakers are from the Center for Inclusive Growth at Mastercard. We're honored to have this panel today. And what you're going to find out is that these colleagues speak the same language as the rest of us that are interested in this forum when it comes to thinking about data science for social impact or the public good. Our lead speaker is Shamina Singh, and together with her colleagues from Mastercard, will share examples of how data is helping to advance an agenda of inclusive growth. Shamina is the founder and president of the Center for Inclusive Growth and Vice President of Corporate Sustainability at Mastercard. Since 2014, Shamina led the center with an emphasis on financial inclusion as a way out of poverty. Her team leverages Mastercard's data, technology, capital, and expertise for social impact. In her role as Executive Vice President for Sustainability, she is responsible for the development and implementation of the environmental, social, and governance strategy across the company. Shamina started her post-secondary education in our own state of Virginia, earning a Bachelor of Science degree from Old Dominion University. She then traveled south and earned a Master of Public Administration at the University of Texas at Austin. Later, she completed executive education programs with some focus on global affairs at Harvard, Yale, and the Indian School of Business. Joining Shamina today are Arturo Franco, Vice President of Data and Insights at Mastercard. He holds a degree from Monterey Tech and also a degree from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Also joining us is Michelle Thompson. She's a Senior Data Fellow at Mastercard, also an Associate Professor at the University of New Orleans. Her post-secondary training was in New York at Syracuse University. And finally, to round out the group is Matt Lindsey, Senior Principal at Mastercard's Service Social Impact Group. Matt rounds out the group's educational research as well with degrees from the Midwest, University of Michigan, and University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I want to thank you all for your time today, and we look forward to what you have to say in a robust Q&A session following your presentation. And with that, let me turn it over to Shamina.
Thanks so much for your kind introduction. It's really great to be with everybody here today. I'm Shamina Singh, and I founded the Center for Inclusive Growth in 2014. Basically, we're the philanthropic hub of Mastercard, and we seek to advance equitable and sustainable economic growth around the world. We're focused on achieving this by tackling two pressing problems: income inequality and information inequality. We're all familiar with income inequality. It's the problem of our time. But information inequality, I would argue, is a problem for the ages. I was on a panel recently with the former mayor of Philadelphia, Michael Nutter, who said something that really struck a chord. He said, where 60 years ago, people fought for access to lunch counters, voting booths, today it's a struggle for equal access to technology information. And that means not just internet access, but access to the data and knowledge that drive our economy and society. While many have access to data, some organizations have data scientists and sophisticated data models and analytics to guide decisions. Meanwhile, others, mostly in the nonprofit space, are relying on antiquated tools and systems. At no time has addressing this divide been more pressing. We've seen firsthand how the pandemic has exposed many of the pre-existing inequalities present in society. With the remit to identify and use the company's assets for social impact, my colleagues and I have been working to address not only the health and economic disparities exacerbated by the pandemic, but also how access to data can better support inclusive growth. In a few moments, you'll hear directly from them as they share a few examples of how tapping into the power of data and insights can advance inclusive growth. But before I invite them to do just that, I'd like to speak what I believe are the three pillars which we must build the field of data science for social impact. First, we need to prove the case. We need to demonstrate the transformational power of data science for social impact and point to use cases that will serve as examples that can be applied to similar problems across the social sector. Second, we need to build capacity. We must work to expand the talent pool of data science for social impact experts in partnership with academia, public and private organizations. Our focus should be on helping organizations not only recruit more of these experts to teams, but enhance the capacity of the organization through technological means to really shrink the gap between the data haves and the data have-nots. And third, we need to transform the commons. We must commit to convening thinkers, to influencers, to advance public goods, to transform the ecosystem of data science. We should aim to make data sets for social impact more accessible while adhering to the principles of responsible data use. And we should support the creation of data governance standards and legal frameworks and robust research that propels the field forward. While these are imperative to the field building I described, I want to emphasize that our focus has been, must be, and always will be on building a field that is people-centric first and data-enabled second. What do I mean by this? Well, simply it means that when it comes to your data, at least Mastercard, we believe you own it, you control it, and you should benefit from its use while we protect your privacy. These are the beliefs we've committed to as part of our recently announced data responsibility imperative. And as part of the launch of the data responsibility imperative, we also developed 6 data responsibility principles to uphold those beliefs and to hold ourselves accountable. They are security privacy, meaning uphold best-in-class security and privacy practices, integrity, be deliberate in order to minimize biases and unintended consequences, accountability, keep consumer interests at the center of their data practices, innovation, innovate to ensure individuals benefit from the use of their data through better experiences, products, and services, transparency and control, explain how we collect, use, and share an individual's data and give individuals the ability to control its use. Finally, social impact. Use information to identify needs and opportunities to make a positive impact on society. We all agreed that data has the potential to fuel the next century of innovation, but only if our data practices are held to high standards we all deserve. At Mastercard and through Data Responsibility Imperative, we've committed to managing personal data safely and securely and in ways that are ethical, compliant, and of benefit to individuals. You're about to hear from my incredible colleagues, Arturo, Matt, and Michelle, about how we're putting our data where our mouth is. But at a high level, here's what we're excited to speak with you more about today. Matt will share lessons on how we're using our data technology to supply tools, innovation, and research to the public sector as the pandemic has upended lives and livelihoods. Arturo will discuss how we're working with local policymakers and civil society leaders to mobilize data to help drive investments in overlooked and underserved communities across the United States, including opportunity zones. And Michelle will tell the story how Mastercard data and data scientists are helping to unlock potential and strengthen the resiliency and financial security of small businesses in New Orleans. So with that, I'll turn it to Matt Lindsey to kick us off. Matt?
Thanks, Shamina. If we want to head to perfect. So again, my name is Matt Lindsey. I work in Mastercard's Data and Services Group on a team that's oriented towards applying our data analytic and insight capabilities into driving social impact. And so I'd like to talk through an example that we have been using this year in the current environment that I think really demonstrates the capabilities that Mastercard has is a result of us really pushing ourselves to make the type of impact that we want to out in the public space. And so I'll talk about the Geoinsights Platform. This is a Mastercard platform. It leverages our aggregated and anonymized data, with data privacy always at the forefront, as Shamina mentioned, but provides information to cities, planners, developers, even private companies, that is at a level of granularity and recency that is not otherwise available. And so when you look at this solution, and we'll go into some more specifics with an example in the next slide, but just to kind of orient everybody to it. When you look at this solution, it provides data that is indexed from a spend standpoint down to the city block level, broken out by different industries. So you can see groceries, eating places, hotels, retail, and so on. And comparative over multiple timeframes. So I can compare to last month, last quarter, last year, last 5 years, anchoring back to, I believe it's 2016. And so when we are able to look at that level of granularity and that recent of data with an approximate 2-week lag time, you have the ability to make near real-time decisions when you're looking at how to affect a population and the environment in which cities are operating. It is additionally beneficial because other data sets, other sources of information that cities have historically used do not have this level of granularity from a geographic standpoint, nor are they as recently updated, sometimes 6 to 8 week type of lag time. And the way that we're seeing this get deployed is a few different scenarios. One, taking a look at current geographic performance within a city area or within an entire metro area. being able to look at the city block level for the disparity of performance across all these different industries provides a level of information that allows differential decision making and differential interventions, ensuring that support gets to the places that need it most. There's an opportunity to develop a network strategy response. So again, looking across an entire geographic area and making the decisions that are best based on where the need is and where differential performance is happening. And also identifying recovery opportunities and actions. So really deploying assets and resources to the places that are going to need them the most and not wasting them on areas that perhaps don't need them. And we'll see this come to life as we come to the next slide here. So here is a visual of two different industry segments, eating places, which is essentially restaurants, and grocery stores. You're looking at Manhattan and the surrounding areas, and you're seeing a comparison between May 2020 and May 2019. And on these charts, when you look at the color coding, blue means that the spending is cooling, if you will, on a comparative basis. So has gone down in 2020 versus 2019, as you see on the left side. And red means that it's heating up, has gone up in that time comparison. And so what we're looking at here is two different ways of seeing what's happening during the pandemic shutdown period of May this year. And so we started working with the city of New York in their planning offices as they really tried to find real-time information about what was happening to their city during this pandemic, and specifically the economic impacts of the shutdown. And so this is from May. So we are at this point, between 6 and 8 weeks in to shutdown periods. And so you really have, the full economic impact starting to be felt here. And what the city is trying to do is, one, again, assess the impact. Two, understand what's happening from a tax revenue standpoint. We're going to come back to that on the next slide. And three, already start to think about various planning scenarios. So you can think about what's going to happen for balance of this year and for future years as they think about their tax revenue income. And what this information really helped us to understand and work with the city on was the difference in two different narratives that were happening at this time. So the first one on the left-hand side, you see that the spend and eating places has, of course, decreased substantially on a year-over-year basis. In essence, shut down in 2020 versus the prior year. And that's no surprise, with a few exceptions that you see noted on the chart. You really see just a complete drop-off of restaurant spending. And that makes sense. With everything that we know, restaurants are closed and aren't doing any business. So that's what you expect. On the right-hand side, though, what you're starting to see is where the specificity and the granularity of our data really comes into play. So if you listen to the national narrative and even a city and state-by-state narrative, what you heard was grocery spending is up substantially. Everybody is going to the grocery store or having groceries delivered at home. They're cooking at home. They're making sourdough, whatever it happens to be. And so grocery stores are doing great, is what everybody heard. But what you're seeing here is something that's a little bit different than that. So when you look at the chart for Manhattan, you actually see that grocery spend is down on a year-over-year basis. Certainly in the outer areas, where people are staying at home, grocery store spend is up. But what this is pointing to is the fact that people are either leaving the city and simply not spending any money there, or they're doing a lot less grocery spending, and they're just doing what they can to get by. And the reason that that's so important is that this now helps the city of New York start to plan which type of grocers, maybe these are small mom and pop, small footprint type stores, which type of grocers and where are going to need the most support now to stay open, but also in recovery. And so that's the level of detail you can really get to, in our data set. If we go to the next slide here, you can start to see then how does this practically start to get built into budgets. So we're working with the planning offices in New York, as I mentioned, and what you see highlighted on this chart, is one of the scenarios that they're planning on for what they should expect a change in their tax revenue looking out over the next 5 years. And while you saw earlier that restaurant spend was down, but grocery store was somewhat offsetting that and going up, in the city of New York, restaurant spend is taxed, but groceries are not. And so that still creates quite a large hole for the revenue planning. So now what you can start to see is the way that New York City is starting to think about their income from taxes over the next 5 years. This provides invaluable insight for them on the type of programs they're going to be able to fund, what they're going to have to do to generate other forms of revenue, but also gives a little bit of insight in how they're thinking about a recovery. You certainly see a drop off for balance of this year, but what you can see for next year is an even bigger hole in their tax income, largely owing to it taking more time for people to return to the city, for tourism to pick up, for opening of in-person dining, and then reclosing again, as you saw over the past week, and those types of activities. And so this provides, again, the level of insight and the granularity, but also the recency of data to allow the city to make these types of decisions, how they're going to run their city, not only for the short term, but also planning out over the long term. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Arturo, and I look forward to some of the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Shamina. As Shamina said, I am Arturo Franco. I'm the head of research, data, and insight for the center. And as she also mentioned, the Center for Inclusive Growth tries to leverage the assets of the company in everything we do. So we're always thinking about the tools that we have that are developed by Matt and his colleagues, and how we can put those tools in the hands of people making decisions that can have a social impact in the future. So a couple of years ago, I was tasked with developing our economic development policy, our economic development pillar. And just around that time, I happened to read an op-ed by David Brooks in the New York Times that was pushing us to think about the neighborhood and not the individual as a unit of analysis. He said, what would be the transformational impact if instead of using models that are centered around the individual, we would look into neighborhoods as this essential space for social change. And so I was thinking about place-based economic development, and we knew that we had this amazing data that was granular enough to go down, as you just saw, to a block-by-block level in the policy space to the census tract level. And then we got a use case. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act created this incentive around the country called opportunity zones. And suddenly in 2018, there were about 8,000, almost 9,000 census tracts in the United States that were suddenly open for investment, where people could come and invest in both real estate and businesses with a tax credit, with a very lofty tax credit. So we decided to go into that space, believing that if policymakers and decision makers could have access to better data and could have access to a little bit of the history of each of these neighborhoods, they would understand the needs of these neighborhoods better, and they would be making better decisions. So in 2019, we launched a public good, the Inclusive Growth Score, which all of you can go to. It's inclusivegrowthscore.com and search on. And the idea was to pair the power of Mastercard's very granular, anonymized, and aggregated data with other data sets that could tell a comprehensive story about each neighborhood. And to do so, we didn't just sit in our office. We went out to the country in a bit of a roadshow. And we visited small cities like Erie, Pennsylvania, and Dayton, Ohio. We went to bigger cities in the middle of the country, like Oklahoma City. We talked to people in LA and New York, and we asked them what kind of data would paint a comprehensive picture of a neighborhood. And so if we go to the next slide, this is kind of where we landed last year. We created an index, we created a scorecard, which I like to think of like a report card for the neighborhood from an economic perspective and from a development perspective. And you will see that scorecard has 3 pillars. The first being things that measure the quality of the place. The second thing is the economy and the dynamics of the economy. And the third being the well-being of the community. And we have 2 types of variables. The first type of variable is inclusion variables, and the second type of variable are growth variables. Because we believe in an economy where the benefits are shared more broadly, we wanted to show by example that you benefit from measuring both how the growth is generated and also how that growth is distributed with the inclusion metrics. So I'll pause for a second so you see some of the things that we're measuring. We had 1/3 of the variables come from the census, 1/3 of the variables come from Mastercard, and 1/3 of the variables come from other proprietary sources. And we created this index for 2017 and 2018. If you go into the tool now, you will find 2 surprises. The first is that we've added 2019. The second is that we are no longer just following these 8,000 or so census tracts, which are opportunity zones, but that we have actually expanded the tool, thanks to Matt and his team, to cover the entirety of the US. So this is a tool that anyone can access and can use to make decisions. So what are some of these decisions, or what are some of the ways in which we are seeing people use this tool? If we can go to the next slide, Adi. We have been in close contact with communities. For example, in going back to the opportunity zone incentive that had been trying to bring investment to what is probably one of the poorest zip codes in the United States, and also happens to be a food desert. And they wanted to build a grocery store and a little market for food, for healthy food in that place. And so we used the inclusive growth score to show the community and the investors that there was potential there, that there was economic potential in the community, and they were able to secure a $40 million investment. As I said, in an underserved census tract that was usually written off. We've helped build local data assets in economic development organizations in big cities, where they are using this data not just for investment, but also to track things like racial equity around the city. And we are also using the Inclusive Growth Score to help communities bring funding from, for example, CDFIs. So some of the country's biggest CDFIs have actually adopted our 18 metrics as one of the tools that they use to analyze the neighborhoods in which they're trying to invest. And so this is an example of how we took data and a tool that existed in the commercial space, and rather than doing what Matt does, which is trying to find applications of that tool in the policy space with cities or with communities, we actually ended up creating a completely new tool that was fit for purpose, that used the community to give us input on what variables mattered to them, and that is now being used by hundreds of communities around the country. So that's what I wanted to share with you.
Great, thank you, Arturo. Next slide. Hi, again, I'm Dr. Michelle Thompson. And since 2008, I've been an associate professor in the Department of Planning and Urban Studies at the University of New Orleans. And the story that I'm about to talk about is kind of like putting this all together from the theoretical framework of how do you engage a community, try to teach students to listen to the community on what their needs are. These are our future planners who are going in to try to help solve some of the problems specifically focused on lower income and underserved neighborhoods. But there's a lot of data that's been collected and it's not able to talk with each other. And so the idea that there's public data on the left-hand side of that grid where we have census information, census tract information, we're talking about census blocks. Well, people don't think of themselves as a census block. So we want to try to figure out how can we have data so that the community can understand what it is that they're getting, how they can use it. And that's in the academy. But what's happened in the last few years, it's been so exciting that I've been able to work with the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth as a senior data fellow. And the idea was that the accessibility of private data, whether it's a nonprofit business who might be gathering information on, converting folks from unbanked to bankable, or in this case, the opportunity to get the access to anonymized and aggregated data with Mastercard was certainly a dream, but it was a dream come true. Next slide. So it's happened not just in New Orleans, but in many cities. There's been, there still has been a lack of information on what is happening in neighborhoods that really are cash-based. Have the investments really proven themselves? How have neighborhoods changed? We start getting into the G word, gentrification. And after those investments are put in, how have those businesses actually performed? So we started looking at the Liverpool-Claiborne Corridor, LCC, or the Claiborne Corridor Cultural Innovation District. While my students over the past 10 years were going down and with their clipboards and looking at the changes in the market and talking to business owners, they said, that's nice, those maps are great, but it's not enough for us to show that we really are growing and coming back. This was in 2008, a couple years after Hurricane Katrina. But in the mid-60s, as you can see on the top right picture, Interstate 10, like many places across the country, highways were built to really get access to the suburbs. But what that did was, in New Orleans, specifically along Claiborne Avenue, there were the second largest historic oak trees were torn down, and over 326 businesses, specifically Black-owned businesses, were decimated. And this is part of that urban renewal. Next slide, please. So the project that we've been focusing on, and through the help of using the Inclusive Growth Score tool and also Geoinsights, but an amazing group of volunteers through a Mastercard Datathon last year, that gazillion bytes of data that comes in that is anonymized, we wanted to figure out how can we get our arms around it and be able to look at the neighborhood on the left-hand side, that Liverpool-Claiborne corridor. It's a place-based development strategy that was put together by the city, where they wanted to take disaster community development block grant funds, philanthropic monies, and see if they can help areas, especially hardest hit in Katrina, like the lower 9th Ward on the right-hand side, and try to make a change. They thought about taking down Interstate 10, but that wasn't possible. So then the federal government started working with the state, and that highlighted yellow area became a test case, the Claiborne Innovation District, where that became a taxing area for cultural overlay. So what does that mean? The Mardi Gras Indians who want to save their culture and making their beads. If the areas where there were small businesses, brick and mortar, many of whom were torn down or in bad condition, but there were still many markets, informal markets, but the city wanted them to get on the tax rolls, obviously, but they also wanted to make sure that they can grow. But what the businesses were concerned about While these wonderful programs on the right-hand side called Opportunity Zone, they were fearful that some of these private investors were going to edge them out, even if there was a tax overlay and restrictions on making sure that the businesses they had left would come back first. Next slide. So we went back to the community and said, let's take a look at what it is that you need to tell your story. Because the information that is readily available on communities that are disinvested and areas that have gone through man-made or natural disasters is limited. And that's where we were able to bring together that Mastercard data. And on here, these are not the individual businesses, but what we're showing is that in 2015, we were able to identify 175 new businesses along that corridor. In 2016, 188. And that intervention of the taxes, not to say that it was wholly through that support of that taxation district, but there was a significant jump in 2017 to 235 businesses and 2018 to 337. So how does that help? Next slide. What it helps with on an academic level is trying to make sure that the new technologies going forth really still consider that the community needs and the voice needs to be heard first. And we have to use language that is common. Again, talking about things in terms of a block group means nothing to folks who are trying to buy groceries down the livable Claiborne corridor. But we were able to not only look at citywide information, neighborhood, but down to the census tract. And what's exciting is we're able to combine a number of different, used to be disparate data sets to look at the neighborhood to have a better picture. That information was used by those nonprofits who became economic development corporation. And they were able to take that and say, we are growing, we are building. And they received technical assistance and money from philanthropy to expand the corridor. So that's ongoing. The middle Spendix index performance, we updated from May 2018 to April 2020. And as was said before, the updates are more ready. They are more accessible. And it already shows some rise in the spending patterns on the bottom right. About 61% were eating places, which sort of makes sense given what has happened with COVID-19. So the story is still continuing. Because as we continue to look at the changes in the census information, and there are limitations on what may happen in the future in terms of access and what we can tell about neighborhoods, we need the private data, the public data, and the community voice all together to really figure out what's best for the community, by the community. And that's why this project has been fantastic. So I'd like to take a few minutes on this, about 3 minutes, for you to hear from the community and have an overview of what we tried to accomplish in this project. Next slide, please.
The world is made up of communities. Every neighborhood has a story, and those memories are still alive in the community. I grew up in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, this area of the city that is now known as the Claiborne Corridor. This was a neighborhood of wonder and excitement, of cultural traditions, of family gatherings. And then residents talk about the monster. When the interstate was built in 1967 through eminent domain, we lost 326 Black-owned businesses. We lost intergenerational wealth, opportunities to invest in our own neighborhoods. Claiborne Avenue went from being one of the most successful business districts in the southeastern United States to being the least successful business district in the city of New Orleans. But the vibrancy is coming back to the street. And I believe that the data insights will help us to grow that and to formalize it in a way that helps this to become a destination.
As a data fellow for the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, my job has been to try to develop a new way for data to be used by the Claiborne community to see if they can encourage investment. The Claiborne Innovation District is just a 19-block area within the livable Claiborne corridor. There's literally hundreds and thousands of people on a daily basis driving over the Claiborne Innovation District. What they don't know is on the ground, there's a vibrant neighborhood that's growing and it's going to continue to grow. But they needed the information to show that people are rebuilding in the neighborhood, and that's what we're providing. An important part of the work that we're doing right now is to try to make sure that we get different types of data that will help explain the buying power in the neighborhood. There's municipal data, community data, and anonymized and aggregated spending data. So for the community data, we physically walk out into the neighborhood, we take our clipboard, and we'll make a map of the property conditions. And putting those all together will give a clearer picture on what the buying power is of a neighborhood. Full strategy of place-based development.
Yes. I think that's what it is. Well, you know what? This is 138% increase in consumer spending. I mean, that's beyond our wildest dreams. Every bit of information you have amplifies the success of residents being given control of their own community. So that is the power of the data. That is the power of knowing. We still have a lot of work to do on Claiborne, but the data insights were an amazing catalyst for our community, because now when I walk down Claiborne, I can see the businesses starting to fill in.
What's wonderful about this particular neighborhood is when you look up and see that bridge, even though there's a lot of people passing you by, you can see the city and you can see growth. It's going from hopeless to hope.
Thank you. Now I'll turn this back over to Shamina.
Well, it is hard to follow these presentations of data for social impact in action. So just a huge thanks to Matt, Arturo, and Michelle for their hard work and the work that they continue to do to bring what we're talking about here today to life. It's clear that, you know, data ubiquitous, the opportunities offered by the data revolution that we're living through are even larger. And these efforts represent merely the starting point, not the final destination. There's still so much more work to do. That's why the center recently partnered with the Rockefeller Foundation to launch data.org. Data.org will serve as a platform for partnerships to expand further the field of data science for social impact and to ensure that nonprofit and civic organizations are well positioned to take advantage of the data revolution. And through data.org, we launched a new $10 million Inclusive Growth and Recovery Challenge. The challenge was an open call for breakthrough ideas that harness the power of data science to help people and communities thrive, especially in the wake of COVID-19's economic impact. So stay tuned for information on the winners. Let me end with this before we open it up for Q&A. Over the last 2 years alone, 90% of the data in the world was generated. However, we're not harnessing even 1% of its power. Like the introduction of science to medicine 100 years ago transformed the delivery of health worldwide, I think we are poised to take the next leap to make data science a transformational tool in the way social issues are identified and solved. So I hope you'll join Matt, Arturo, Michelle, and myself on this journey to build the field of data science for social impact. As a first step, I'd encourage you to visit the center's website and sign up for our newsletter to get the latest insights and learn about the opportunities for collaboration. Visit mastercardcenter.org to sign up, and while you're at it, head over to data.org and be sure to subscribe to get the latest news on the Inclusive Growth Challenge and much, much more. I want to thank Adi Rao for all of his support and help in putting this presentation together. And once again, thank my fellow panelists and of course, the conference organizers for having us here today. I'm happy to open it up to Q&A.
Shamina, thank you very much. And why don't we stop share there? It's good so we can see everybody. So we have several questions. I'm going to start with a few about how you guys work with communities, and then we'll go to some others about how people can access and use your data. So one question is about the opportunity zones. So based on the data that you've gathered, does it appear that opportunity zone neighborhoods have made progress with economic growth and financial inclusion since their introduction in 2017? And this comes from Chris Arnold.
I think it's too early to tell, but turn it over to Matt to tell us what the data story says.
Yeah, I'll start, and Arturo, you should absolutely jump in as well. And as Shamina said, it's very early because while this legislation was put in place in 2017, it wasn't really understood until 2018, and nobody had much of an opportunity to act on it until 2019 on a broader basis. And so here's some things that we believe. One, any incremental dollar directed towards some of these left behind neighborhoods is going to help them in their growth. We can help provide insights to make sure those dollars are being spent in ways that are going to help the local community, as Arturo had outlined. And also, measurement is a key aspect of understanding whether or not it has worked. And as we looked around, there's really not a lot of ways to understand the impact from the legislation. And that's one of the reasons why in the inclusive growth score that Arturo walked everybody through, it starts with 2017 data, and every single year just appends the next year's worth of data onto the end of it so that you can track progress and start to see some of that comparative performance across different census tracts. So we're actually looking right now at what the impact has been over the past few years. And expect that with the current political environment, there could always be some updates and changes. So we're excited to be able to help measure that. Arturo, I don't know if there's anything you would add there.
No, I think you covered it very well. I mean, when we first put this data out there, we wrote, actually Adi and myself wrote a blog that you can find on our website called Measuring Opportunity One Neighborhood at a Time, where we basically asked a very simple question, which is, you would expect to see opportunity zones to fall at the left of the distribution of US Census tracts in most of the measures that we put on the inclusive growth score, right? Because if you think about it, when you have 100 in the inclusive growth score, it means that you are growing in an inclusive way. When you have 0, it means that you're the census tract that's doing the worst in both aspects, right? And what we found is that while generally the distribution of opportunity zones was in the place where it had to be, communities that needed an incentive, there were a few pieces of that distribution that might have fallen a little bit further than what we would think was ideal. And so there have been some questionings about how these places were chosen in the first place. But we will come out with an analysis hopefully soon on what we are seeing, as Matt said, with the caveat that we're only really capturing the first year of the incentive. It's a 10-year incentive. And so the investments are just starting to happen now.
So we have several questions about the data that you guys are using. And in particular, we've got, in these questions, I'm going to kind of bundle them together. One is coming from a university center, one is coming from a local government, another one is coming from an NGO, another is a university department, and they're sort of all the same. Wanting to know that these resources that you're putting together, how are they available to others? Not just through the tool that you might visualize them, but are these resources actually available for download and to be combining with other people's data and research is the gist of these questions.
Hi, yes, Michelle, I'm going to say yes. I'll jump in with it was wonderful about the inclusive growth score as I was able to incorporate that last year in a class that we were doing as service learning. with a neighborhood organization. And we wanted to look at the 13 qualified opportunity zones in the community. We wanted to be able to look and see what the differences are. So we had census information. We trained the students on the inclusive growth score tool, came up with different scenarios where they can be used, and then provided that information to the community. So that to me is just being a little bit more creative in the syllabus, but also being, just testing it out. I think it worked very well.
And so are you actually able to download the scores by census tract into a data file that you could then port into something else?
Yes, that's a short question. Shortest answer to the question, yes. And
yeah,
there's there's tutorials, there's templated information, but in terms of being able to get into that black box and import information, no. But go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was just going to say, and as you can imagine, it's not the first time we've had that question when we have these type of forums, and so watch for an API coming hopefully by end of year, if not early January, because the inclusive growth score itself, as Arturo shared, is fantastic, but the underlying data components and the things that feed into it, we're finding are what people really want to get their hands on, and so an API will provide that. Stay tuned, sign up, get access to the tool, and then you'll be able to see when some of that new functionality comes around.
And I want to say the Geoinsights, even though it is a product that folks would pay for, what was exciting for me to see is that, especially during COVID, that the City Possible team worked with the City of New Orleans, and they provided training on how to use that tool. How that really helped in terms of being able to work with the city, which again, I'm not with the city, I'm not inside the center permanently, but the idea is that that tool was available and it was definitely needed at a time when the city didn't have access to that ready information. So you have this wonderful free open tool with IGS, and then the Geoinsights. I don't know the pricing, so you'd have to talk with them about it, but it is definitely worth looking at, and the training was fantastic as I observed that with the city.
Well, thank you. So a couple questions now about how you work and where you work. So one question from Kathy Wotecki, one of our actually distinguished Institute professors, is asking, do you have projects in other countries with Mastercard where Mastercard does business? Any experience in low and middle income countries?
I'm going to take that.
Please.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So we operate around the world, and not only places where Mastercard has high penetration, but really truly global in nature, on every continent and so on. So lots of experience across Middle East and Africa, Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia, certainly Europe, Latin America. Similar type of projects, and the Center for Inclusive Growth is truly set up as a global entity with resources on the ground in each one of these regions. So the coverage is truly worldwide.
Matt, do you just want to give the example of the program you just ran in Latin America?
Sure, happy to. And so we partnered with one of Mastercard's nonprofit grant recipients, Axion. Folks will have heard of them. That's really focused on driving financial inclusion in marketplaces around the world, developing geographies. And together with Axion, we partnered with one of their member organizations, a bank in Bolivia called Banco Sol, and work with them to understand how they can best engage some of their clientele that are underbanked and even unbanked, to really participate in the different products and offerings, and really start to come into a more structured financial system. And so it was fantastic work. But one of the things that we know is that when people participate in a structured financial system, the economy gets better, the community gets better, and so it's it's an area that Mastercard is really focused on. So that's a great example in one of these geographies.
And I just
Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, I'm just going to add that in terms of some of the work that's being done in Africa, my husband has a nonprofit there, but where we provide money for cows. And the idea of being able to transfer money electronically I know Mastercard has been participating in programs there as well. So there's it's around the planet, but that's one I know personally.
I'll tell you one innovative use of data that, again, we cover here, but it's the idea of credit worthiness. And so we do have a program going right now in Kenya with a partner, Unilever, which is obviously a big product company there, where they, in their supply chain of about 40,000 very small shops that serve tiny communities in Kenya, we worked with them to understand that the buying of product off of the Unilever data platform, their supply chain, worked with the banking client of Mastercard's to start using that data to determine alternative forms of credit worthiness. And so that behavior of buying and selling that Unilever was seeing on their data platform, hadn't realized was actually very useful, especially for women shop owners who don't always have standard forms of collateral. So they can't put up a tractor, for example, to get a loan from a regulated bank. But after using the alternative credit scores that were generated from the Unilever platform, we've been able to work with over 26,000 shop owners, even through COVID, to enhance their credit worthiness and their credit scores.
That's really exciting. That's really, really exciting. And I want to come back to, there's way more questions than you'll have time to answer, but I want to come back to, there's a collection of questions around how do you decide which communities to work with? You gave an example of New York, you gave an example of New Orleans, you've given some wonderful examples overseas. But how do you actually decide which communities to work with, and how do they work with you? I mean, how do they get sort of trained up to be able to actually be able to take in what you're trying to do? And then I'll extend it one little bit further to some of the questions that have asked, how do we get these tools in the hands of lawmakers as well, to be able to have that influence and help them understand the shocks that our communities are going through?
Let me just take a crack at the prioritization, if you will. It's not necessarily by city, community, or anything like that. It's really now about scale. And so scale and replication. And so part of what Matt and Arturo are building these toolkits and these data sets are so that we can operate at scale. And so so for example, the inclusive score, that's why we're using it in St. Louis and Birmingham and in Miami and in Atlanta and in New York. So the idea here is, are there things that are being built or being used that, if provided either maybe grant money or technical support or something related to data, that could scale exponentially? Those are the type of projects that we're looking at now. And so I think that's sort of a first layer. And then I think that's precisely the reason why we work to create data.org, is because we have to create this field of data science for social impact. So it's not enough that Mastercard is doing this. It has to be that everybody is doing this, and this becomes the way you do this work. And so that's why universities like yours, Sally, are so important, because you're training next gen and you're creating the use cases. We need to take you and replicate you by 1 million. And so this is why we're doing this work.
Well, that's really wonderful. I really have to bring this to a close. We're at the witching hour, which is so sad. I thank everyone for your questions and just an inspiring presentation. And I know a lot of my colleagues in my division, my research division, are on, and they're all Googling right now how to get access to this data. So that's good news. So thank you.
Feel free to contact us, email us, reach out to us. We have a great team here who'd be more than happy to help with whatever the questions are.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone. And thanks to all of the audience. We really appreciate you joining us. And we will reconvene in a few months with Hadley Wickham from our studio. So that should be fun. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.